Hello there, you're watching the press preview. Our first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. So it's time to see what's making the headlines tonight with Jasmine, Cameron-Chileshe and Camilla Turner. So very good to see you both. I'm very pleased to say that they will both be with us from now until midnight. First of all, let's take a look at what's on some of the front pages. And the Daily Telegraph leads with the war in Ukraine, reporting Putin set to declare occupied land part of Russia. On the cost of living crisis, the Daily Mail says freedom begins with tax cuts. Truss signals profound shift in policy, writes the FT, on possible tax cuts. And the Eye also leads with that story, with their headline, Mortgage rate shock as Truss cuts UK taxes. The new PM to cut stamp duty in push for prosperity is the Times front page. The Guardian says Biden rejected the new PM's embrace of Reaganite tax policies. A thoroughly modern monarchy for King Charles, says The Mirror. The Express says the public backs this move for a slimmed-back monarchy. The Metro has the new King and Queen consort returning to Balmoral to continue their mourning in private. And the Star has the so-called queue-jumping saga involving this morning television hosts Holly Willoughby and Phil Schofield on its front page. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code that you can see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us. But let's bring in then Jasmine, Cameron-Chileshe and Camilla Turner to go through those papers. And it's interesting, isn't it, that Liz Truss, our new Prime Minister, who was only in the job for 2 days before national mourning, of course, started after the announcement of the Queen's death. But now the spotlight is back on her and all the front pages pretty much focusing on the days ahead. You've picked out, Jasmine, first of all, the Financial Times front page. Their headline is Truss signals profound shift in policy with defence of tax cuts. And it looks like we're going to get an announcement at the end of the week with more details on that.
Yeah, so it's quite a pivotal week for Truss. As you mentioned, she became PM, she announced her energy package, and then obviously we had the passing of the Queen. And so her government was forced to sort of, change tact and change tone, and government business couldn't continue as usual. But now we've passed this period of national mourning. She's, in a sense, got to introduce herself to the public, got to introduce herself to MPs, and really cram in a lot of policy over quite a small period of time. And so this week we're expecting a bit more detail on some of the support for businesses facing rising energy costs. We're expecting an announcement on the NHS on Thursday. But more crucially, we are expecting a sort of mini budget on Friday. And this is where we're really expecting to see some of those promises that we saw Truss talk about throughout the leadership campaign, the slashing of national insurance, the slashing of the planned corporation tax hike. We're really expecting to see some of those be introduced to the House of Commons. And it'll be quite interesting to see how MPs react to some of her policies. Now, if we look to her cabinet, for example, her cabinet is filled with loyalists, those who have backed her and really support her ideology, particularly on things like tax cuts, whereas the backbenchers are filled with, Rishi Sunak supporters of Boris Johnson. So it'll be really interesting to see how some of these economic policies really go down with the MPs.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And I'm just going to show everybody the Times newspaper, Camilla, because I know that you won't have had a chance to look at this. So I'm not going to quiz you on the detail, but the headline is interesting. They're saying Truss to cut stamp duty in push for prosperity. So if the Times is right, that's another tax cut that could be on the cards. And as the Financial Times does report here, and as Liz Truss told our political editor as well, she's very keen to defend this criticism that her tax cuts are unfair, that they are benefiting the wealthy the most. She says she's prepared to be unpopular on that, but she thinks it's in the interest of growth.
Yes, that's right. And this story in the Times about the stamp duty cut is just another example of all these quite drastic measures Liz Truss is looking to introduce to try and do what she sees as being the most crucial thing, which is to inject some growth into the economy. And we can see in that Financial Times article, she's really launching quite a staunch defense of her plan here, saying that she's going to be doing unpopular things like lifting the cap on bankers' bonuses, like reversing the national insurance hike, which of course benefits working people and disproportionately benefits those who are higher earners. So some of these measures, which aren't on the face of them going to help the poorest in society, but what she argues will overall benefit society because they'll inject that much needed growth into the economy, and that will over time lead to the UK's prosperity. Whether that comes to fruition or not, and particularly in the time frame, let's say before the next general election, which is only 2 years' time, remains to be seen. It is a bit of a gamble we're having here from Liz Truss with these slightly longer term policies, which may not be popular immediately, but could well yield fruit in the longer term. But just how long that will take, I think, will be the major test for her.
Well, yes, and as Jasmine was saying, interesting to see how her own MPs respond to it, as well as the markets and the public. And her argument then, Jasmine, is that everyone will benefit ultimately if the pie is bigger. But if you look at the front page of The Guardian, they are leading on the fact that the US President Joe Biden today tweeted his rejection of this kind of policy. Downing Street, very quick to say it's ludicrous to say that was in response to the UK's plans, but the timing's a little bit unfortunate there for Liz Truss.
It was quite unfortunate, and bear in mind that Truss and Biden are due to, I think, have their first bilateral meeting tomorrow. So it was a very interestingly timed tweet, and he was saying that he was sick and tired of this idea that trickle-down economics would benefit, all groups in society, from the lower income to the higher income. I mean, I don't think it's any surprise that Truss and Biden aren't necessarily economic bedfellows. I don't think that's a surprise to anyone, but I do think it's slightly embarrassing to Truss, who was trying to introduce herself to MPs, introduce herself to world leaders, and really put forward her staunch economic policy. So I think it's slightly awkward timing. And just touching on what Camilla was saying about the fact that Truss is, very happy to be unpopular. I think it's a very interesting stance to take, because it's important to step back and remember that Truss was only elected, with the support of a very, small pool of Conservative members. She didn't even have the backing of the majority of MPs who were in support of Rishi Sunak. So you think that now would be the time of sort of reaching out and not really wanting to alienate the public with some of these policies that can be seen as disproportionately benefiting the well-off. So I think it's quite an interesting approach. But then, maybe she thinks that actually it's the approach that will work. We had someone like Johnson who loved to be liked, who loved to change his policies based on what was popular. And maybe she thinks actually what the public and what MPs want is someone who's got a firm idea of how to, fix some of the issues that are facing the UK and is going to stick to them come what may.
Well, yes, and let's take a look at the front page of the Eye then, Camilla. Mortgage rate shock as Truss cuts UK taxes, and the prediction here that interest rates could rise by 2 percentage points in the next 4 months, because we've got this situation, haven't we, at the moment, where Liz Truss says she wants to promote growth, and yet we have very high inflation.
Yes, that's right. And I suppose inflation was, of course, the big thing that Rishi Sunak kept going on about during the leadership campaign, in contrast to Liz Truss's vision, which was all about going for growth and will inject these stimulus into the economy, and over time that will help inflation. But here on the iFront page, it's a real stark reminder that inflation is a ongoing and very current problem for people, and that affects not only their energy bills, their utility bills, but also their mortgages. And this is saying it will cost the average household £200 extra a month on tracker deals. So these kind of rising inflationary costs are still going on in the background. And even with these measures Liz Truss is introducing, they won't immediately be able to solve the problem with inflation. Maybe inflation will come down over time, but there is a real current crisis with rising costs. And there isn't really anything that's going to help that in the short term, at least.
So, Jasmine, how much of a gamble is this policy, do you think?
I mean, I think it's quite a big one. I think, most economists and lots of people in the Treasury are agreed that actually the current status quo with the economy isn't that great. It's not necessarily benefiting everyone. But I do think the stakes are quite high. Obviously, Truss has a huge parliamentary majority, but that was off the back of Johnson's 2019 general election win. It's not off the back of, any overriding personal support towards Truss. And I think what she's got to be really careful of is, as Camilla said, if people feel like they're worse off each month, that overall feeling of having less money in your pocket, feeling that bills are getting more expensive, feeling like you can't see a doctor, this general feeling that actually life isn't good, then that's actually going to be very dangerous for Truss, because people will be looking back and thinking, hang on a minute, we've had years of Conservative leadership. Is my life getting any better? And I think those questions and that feeling of unease are going to be very dangerous for Truss. So she's going to really need to sell her policies to the public.
And Camilla, we're going to kick off this section with the front page of the Daily Telegraph, and a lot of focus on Ukraine once again. Now that Russian-backed areas of Ukraine are proposing referendum this weekend on whether that area should join Russia. What are the implications of that, according to this?
Yes, so this is quite a significant development in Ukraine. These are pro-Moscow leaders in 4 Ukrainian regions declaring that they're going to hold these referendums in a series of coordinated announcements. And this makes up 15% of the country's territory, so it is quite significant. And this is seen as paving the way for Russia to formally annex these sections of land. Of course, this has been roundly condemned by the international community, saying that these so-called referendums are a sham, they're going to have no standing in international law. But it is quite a significant development. And in addition to this, this article points out that Russia is currently rushing through some new laws aimed at stricter punishment for desertion and for disobeying orders. So this is being seen as potentially a precursor to a fuller mobilization of Russia's troops, because at the moment they haven't got full-scale conscription. They're only using a part of that army. They're not, by no means using their full army at the moment in Ukraine. So a few quite major developments here, potentially showing that Russia's ready to try and really seize on the land that it does have control of, and try to really bring that under its control.
Yeah, and I said Russian-backed areas. I meant Russian-backed leaders in areas in Ukraine. You're absolutely right. And this is something that we will visit again at the top of the hour in the 11. But let's move on for now, shall we, Jasmine, to the Metro. And they are leading once again with a focus on the royal family. A return to Balmoral is their headline there, with King Charles apparently heading in that direction.
Yeah, so obviously we've had the 10 days of national mourning, and we're seeing the return of Parliament tomorrow, and things sort of resume as normal. But obviously for the royal household, they are still grieving. And I think it's important to note that, throughout the past few days, we've really seen the royals put on a very dignified public face, and in the midst of what must be a lot of personal turmoil, the loss of a mother, a grandmother. And so I think it's quite right and fair that actually the king and the Queen Consort are taking that time away from the public eye to process what's happened. It's a huge transition to lose a parent and then find that you are the king of the country. So I think it just touches on the fact that yes, we have the king as a sort of public figure, but also he's an individual who has lost a parent, and actually that takes time to you need to take time to grieve that as well.
Yeah, absolutely, especially when you've been so busy during the course of the week. You need that time. And turning to the Daily Mirror, they are talking about, they claim it's an exclusive, Camilla, and they say that the King's coronation is likely to be shorter, smaller and less expensive than his mother's, as he vows to modernise the monarchy.
Yes, exactly. So this headline, Thoroughly Modern Monarchy, is really pointing to, I suppose, King Charles's vision for the monarchy, and focusing specifically on the coronation, saying it's going to be a slimmed down, a sort of shorter, more streamlined process, in recognition of the fact that we are facing this cost of living crisis, and he doesn't want to feel too out of sync and out of touch with what the rest of the population are going through. The article's also saying the coronation is going to try to be inclusive and reflective of the country and the Commonwealth. So,
OK, we must leave it there.